Good evening, everyone, and welcome to April 4, 2022 Blue Ribbon Pension Review Committee meeting. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council as well as Board and Commission meetings will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes and to practice social distancing. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6 and AT&T Uverse Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city's web page, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using free app called ScreenWave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. With that said, I'm going to conduct a roll call. Committee Member Amidian.
Present.
Committee Member Bain.
Present.
Committee Member Kedikian.
Present.
Committee Member Macias. Committee Member Manning.
Here.
Committee Member Michaels.
Present.
Committee Member Molano.
Here.
Committee Member Nelson. Committee Member Wolfson.
Here.
Committee Member Finch.
Here.
Committee Member Venz.
Here.
Committee Member Zakarian.
Here.
Committee Member Palos.
Here.
Thank you. Item number 1, regular business agenda. 1A, the agenda for the April 4, 2022 Blue Ribbon Pension Review Committee regular meeting was posted on April 1, 2022 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item number 2, oral communications. We do not have any callers at this time. Item number 3, minutes. 3A, approval of minutes from the March 7, 2022 regular meeting. May I please have a motion and second?
If I may. Hello. Yep.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. I lost everybody for a minute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have one correction from the minutes under item 3, which is the approval of minutes from the February 2nd meeting. For the record, I did not vote twice.
Okay, so amended. Ms. Wilson.
I noticed that in a couple of places, I think we misspelled Mr. Kadikian's name. On page 5 in particular.
We will repair that.
That would be good. Thank you.
Yes, Kanikian, yes. See it. Any other, yes, Mr. Milano.
Thank you very much. The wording on my narrative during the presentation, as shown here on page 1, is highly inaccurate. And also on page 5 at the bottom, is also highly inaccurate. It needs a full rewrite, in my opinion. This is just a very, very poor representation of what I stated. I think it is too much for me to go on at this time, but you can proceed, but I will vote no. I don't agree with the way it was represented.
Can you just give us a little bit more detail on what you are concerned about?
Well, for example, on the where I'm quoted, I guess what I paraphrased, Milano suggested a correction to the top of page 5, where he was mentioned in another comment. I was listening back to the meeting, and I don't see that it's part of the presentation, especially the part that says, which stated that his opinion was inaccurate. I was referring to the opinion of the member, I forgot his name now, who represents the fire membership. And I was pointing something out about his comments.
So
Now-
that Mr. Zakarian's opinion was inaccurate.
Mr. Zakarian, yes, exactly. So I was referring to that.
All
On
right.
page 5,
I don't see a problem with correcting that if that's what the transcript.
basically he just needs to be, redone. And at the bottom of page 5, it states that towards the second sentence, he doesn't think the members knew what they were voting for. And the members is incredibly vague to anyone not following. I was talking about the city council members, right?
All right, let's.
Council,
I think it is.
council members, right? That needs to be corrected.
Okay, we can do that.
I won't bicker on many other things that still quite vague. First paragraph as well. 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph down as well. So if you're going to fix this, I suggest that this last paragraph be clarified a little bit better. It's just not. I don't consider it a very good set of minutes. That's
Okay.
my
So
comments.
the amendments that I have at this point are the spelling of Mr. Kadikian, the two we just referred to, the reference to council, and the reference to Mr. Zakarian. Those are 3, and I feel like there's one other that was first one that was raised.
Mr. Manning did not vote twice.
That's right, Mr. Manning did not vote twice. So those are four amendments. Would anybody like to make a motion to make those 4 amendments and approve the minutes otherwise?
I make the motion for the 4 amendments and approve the minutes.
Second.
And now I'll conduct roll call again. Committee member Amirian,
Yes.
Bain,
Yes.
Kadikian,
Yes.
Manning,
Yes.
Macias,
Yes.
Michaels,
Yes.
Molano,
No.
Nelson, Wolfson,
Yes.
Finch,
Yes.
Venz,
Yes.
Zakarian,
Yes.
Palos.
Yes.
Thank you. Item number 4, business items. 4A, discussion of potential recommendations to City Council.
Okay, so we have, we're going to go through this outline, but before we do, I asked Ms. Harrell, who's down at the, bottom of my screen, I don't know where she is, who unfortunately is very short on time, so we're going to do this a little bit out of order. She, you may recall, spoke to us about POBs, and I had just a couple of more questions for her following that discussion. So I'd like to I asked her to come back for just 5 or 10 minutes. So I guess, as I began to put together potential recommendations for the committee, I ended up really not knowing exactly where you came out really on the question of whether POBs are a potentially viable alternative for the city, and really what your ultimate recommendation is. I understand that in the end it's a policy decision. I get that, and in particular whether you would recommend that the city go ahead with a validation action, which you mentioned as something it could do initially. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe provide a little bit more clarity about, if you were us, if you were the committee, what your recommendation would be on POBs.
So good evening, Chair and members of the committee. Thanks for taking me out of order this evening. So I think the last time that we spoke, interest rates, based on the interest rates at the time, the composite savings was a little over 19%. That's between the safety and the miscellaneous plan. So I think the thing to do is really to look at kind of a floor in terms of what you want your savings to, your minimum savings to be. And if you can achieve that, then the POBs are a viable option, assuming that you all get comfortable with the outcome of POBs and what happens when PERS has investment rates higher or lower than the discount. So I think that I'm not recommending that you go forward with it. I'm not recommending that you don't do it at all, but I think you would be best served by putting yourself in a position to be able to enter the market and issue POBs if market conditions are in your favor. They've been in your favor for a long time now. Obviously, we know interest rates are going up, and so they may not stay in your favor very much longer. And we know the validation process takes a bit of time, sometimes 4 months. So I think you could choose to go ahead to proceed with the validation action. Once the POBs are validated, you don't have to issue them. There's no requirement to, once they're validated, that you have to issue them. I think the idea is that you get through the validation period and you look at the market conditions, and if they meet your criteria for issuing the POBs, then you would go forward. And again, you can do one plan and not the other, because I think I mentioned your safety plan, the savings are higher and on the safety plan, and they're lower on the miscellaneous plan. So kind of as a composite, they're 17% or whatever. And we did look at the sensitivity to interest rates the last time that we talked. And I gave you some analysis, what happens if rates are, 0.25% higher than they were in February, and what happens if they're 1% higher. Well, right now they are 0.25% higher. I think everybody knows what's happened in the market. So we're kind of at that zone where the average savings is about 17.5%.
Got a number. Oops, looks like I got. Oh, thank you. Looks like we have a number of questions. Ms. Wilson was first to raise her hand.
Thank you, Mr. Holzman. Since you're back, I think I'll ask you this question. Are these bonds, are they refundable? I mean, how does it work? Because it's my understanding that a lot of the bonds that get floated are refundable, and then the city is at more risk from interest rate market conditions.
Well, typically pension obligation bonds have a 10-year call provision. So you cannot refinance them, or it's not economical typically to refinance them in the first 10 years. And then after 10 years, you can refinance them if the market conditions are in your favor. No one can force you to refinance them, but if market conditions are in your favor and the current rates are lower than the existing rates, you could refinance them after 10 years.
So are they callable then by the holders after 10 years, or is it strictly at the city's discretion?
It's strictly at the city's discretion. Yeah, there's no put feature here. The buyers can't make you refinance these.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Mr. Milano, I'm sorry. Looks like I was muted.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Harrell, you said that the decision should be based upon market conditions. Can you clarify that for me, please? How exactly are the market conditions that you're considering?
When I'm talking about market conditions, I mean the expected interest rate on the bonds.
I see. And what are the economic factors that impact the expected interest rate on the bonds?
Well, right now, there's a couple of factors that are impacting or can affect interest rate on the bonds. One is what will happen with the war between Russia and Ukraine, and how long that will last, and the impact that has on oil prices, which again impacts inflation and can have an impact on what the our economy does, the world economy. So there's global factors like that, and then there's U.S. domestic factors in terms of what is our unemployment rate, or we're reaching full employment, and what is the Fed Reserve going to do in reaction to that. So the Fed Reserve has kind of announced that they expect to do quite a bit more interest rate increases. Again, that's the short-term rate, but that has an impact on the long-term rate as well. So those are the things that we look for, is like what's happening with inflation and what's happening globally.
Okay. If I may follow up on that, you also mentioned those interest rates compared to the discount rate that CalPERS may be having. Did you say that, or did I miss?
Yeah. So the potential for budgetary savings by issuing a POB is you're issuing at the city's an interest rate that the city can achieve by going out into the bond market. Let's say that it was about 3.1% at the beginning of February. It's about 3.3% now. Compared to what PERS is basically charging you on the unfunded liability, which is now 6.8, it used to be 7. So the spread between what your bonds could be issued at, the interest rate, and what PERS is charging, the 6.8, that's what generates the potential for savings. So the smaller that spread gets, the less savings potential that there is, and the more you're subject to the potential for those savings to be used up depending on the PERS investment performance.
So the smaller the gap between those two numbers, then the less benefit or the less justification it is for issuing the bonds, right?
That's right.
And so the discount rate becomes very important, and the discount rate is not something that we have control over either. But if as a result of inflation, the disbursements that come out of CalPERS become much higher, right? As the pension payments are influenced by the inflation rate, it is possible that CalPERS will come back with a discount rate much higher, right, in future years. Would that be correct?
I don't think so.
No?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. That's just a clarification I wanted to see what would be the impact on that. Because on the one hand, if there is a downturn in the economy and then you're not getting the returns that they expect, the discount rate would go up. And if inflation continues to go up, the demand, should we say, or the adjustment of the pension payments to the current retirees will increase.
Let me just stop there for a second. So the discount rate of 6.8% is set by PERS, and it relates to the rate that they use to calculate. They take the future payments to everyone in your plan, and they present value that back at the discount rate. So the discount rate is kind of fixed. And PERS is only going to reduce the discount rate. They're never going to go back and increase it.
Oh, yes. I forgot. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. My mind is not sharp. There we go. Yes, absolutely.
I know. It's almost 7.
Yes, absolutely. So, I was wondering why in the world this seems like so strange to me. And of course, the discount rates will be going down.
Right.
And as they go down, then the rationale for the bonds becomes less. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bain. Mike?
Yes, can you tell us what it would cost to validate the bonds? You mentioned to go ahead and do that. I assume there's a significant cost to get that far.
It is, what I have seen, a fee of about $25,000 is typical for the validation proceedings.
Thank you.
Mr. Macias, sorry.
How long does the validation last?
It's in perpetuity. It doesn't expire. There's no termination date.
So the investment bankers will look at the city, validate it now, and 3 years down the road, if we want to issue the POBs, then we can, using the financials that they first gathered previously.
I'm sorry, using the financials,
because if we're validating or looking at the city's financials, correct?
No, the validation is actually relating to the legal proceedings for the issuance of the bond. It doesn't have any bearing on the finances at all, the interest rate, anything like that. The city's
okay. Thank you very much.
And yeah, it just looks at purely at the legal question.
All right, perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Any further questions for Ms. Harrell? All right. Well, thank you very much for taking a bit of your evening here, and thank you for coming back and clarifying some of this for us.
Oh, no problem. It's complicated, I know, so and I appreciate you taking me first.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. So now Luke is going to put up an outline, and it is my fervent hope that we can work our way through this outline and take some votes, et cetera, on, or at least sense of the committee on I guess I should say, on where we are. So in thinking about how to organize this outline, we concluded that we should start with withdrawing from CalPERS as a question. Why? Because quite frankly, much of the rest of the outline is moot if we're withdrawing from CalPERS. So it seemed to us that this was the appropriate place to start. And so as I had promised, I promised the executive committee, at least, I guess, I laid out here what, sort of the preliminary thoughts on this without attempting to decide the issue for you, although this particular one is a hard one. So what we know is withdrawing from CalPERS, estimated $2.8 billion liability. By the way, that could go up or down. It is based on the weighted average of the 10 and 30-year Treasury notes. Which last I checked yielded about a little over 1% discount rate, as opposed to the 6.8 discount rate that our liability is currently calculated at. We talked, and again, some of this is a sort of summary of what folks have said in the course of this. There was a question raised: what would happen if we just didn't pay? And we had an expert speak to us about the consequences of that. Sorry. My mother. We had an expert talk to us about the fact that CalPERS would in fact be able to pursue our assets, and also that if for any reason we were, say, bankrupt, that it would reduce the pension payments to our retirees and future payments to our employees. That withdrawal would not release the city from its responsibility for future benefits. Then, as opposed to paying off the current liability, though, withdrawal has one advantage. So the current liability, to remind everybody, was about $600 million. I would say, and we're going to have new materials, I think, for our next session, that because last year was such a good year for CalPERS, that number is likely to be more like $500 million, not $600 million. But again, that's only because we had an extraordinarily good year last year. Ms. Wilson, do you want me to call on you now, or do you want me to wait till I get through the thing?
If you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to say it's most unfortunate that we didn't receive this in time for us to review it before discussing it. And I'm wondering, it seems to me that there had been I thought that there was a decision made that each committee member would have 5 minutes or so to express themselves this evening. And I don't see that happening. I see instead that we have this material that we didn't receive in time to actually look it over. And if we're going to go over it in such detail like this, it's going to take up a lot of time. And I personally would feel like that's not maybe the best way for us to proceed tonight.
So let me respond to that before Mr. Milano speaks. I see Mr. Milano's hand. We did discuss that in executive committee, and what I realized was that, and maybe wrongly, but this was my conclusion, that for some members of the committee in particular, it would be good to recap where we've been and what some of the arguments have been before we ask them to speak. And I will take personal responsibility / blame for that conclusion, but it did seem to me that it would be more productive for people to speak after they had seen a framework of this. If the committee views otherwise, that's, fair enough.
That's precisely what I'm saying, though, is that nobody's had a chance to see this, but for you to read it to us word by word and go into a lot of commentary, if you will, about it, it just doesn't seem like it's the best use of everyone's time this evening.
Mr. Milano?
Wolfson. I concur with Ms. Wolfson on this. I was thinking exactly the same thing. What is the purpose of having an executive committee if we can decide on a completely different approach and agenda for us? We didn't have an executive committee in January. We didn't have a say-so on that. And now we have this. I think that you are, to some extent, correct in that we need to frame and summarize the previous meetings in such a way that it will give any potential speakers a more rounded perception of what we have discussed, right? All the pertinent issues. But I agree with Ms. Wilson. We should have had this thing well in advance before coming in to give immediate or off-the-cuff remarks. Anyway, that's my comment.
Well, I guess what so that leaves us, assuming that's the sense of the committee, and I don't know that it is, but assuming it is for a second, it would leave us with a couple of choices. One would be to go forward today with having people just speak for 5 minutes on their views before we frame the issues. And by the way, we did talk about framing the issues in a document at the executive committee with the pros and cons. So obviously it would have been good if we could have had this to you earlier. We've been working quite hard to put together both this and the report. And so I do apologize for that. And I heard from Mr. Michaels today along a very similar lines, I would say. So I think your choice here is we can defer this to the meeting next week. It does leave us, however, unless we can schedule another meeting, it does leave us short a meeting. I mean, I guess there's a question. I mean, what's the committee's sense of how they'd like to proceed?
You have a question from a committee member, John?
I'm sorry, I can't, for some reason on my screen, see.
Zari Amirian has his hand up. I can see him.
Please, Mr. Amirian, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. I'd just like to make a motion, and that way we can just get a sense of where the committee's at instead of going back and forth on this. Yes, I mean, obviously it would have been helpful to get this, but I understand the time constraints that you were working under as well. And so I would like to move that you finish going through this document, and then as we discussed during the executive committee, that each committee member gets 3 minutes after the discussion of that document, after that, the framing of that document by you, in order to give thoughts on that. That would be my motion.
Is there a second?
Mr. Bain has his hand raised.
I'll second.
I second.
Second.
Vlad, would you like to call the roll?
Vladimir, can you hear us? You're muted.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I was muted.
Can you take roll, please?
Sure. Committee member Amirian?
Yes.
Committee member Bain?
Yes.
Committee member Kedikan?
Yes.
Committee member Manning? Committee member Macias?
Yes.
Committee member Michaels?
Yes.
Committee member Molano?
No.
Committee member Nelson? Committee member Wilson?
No.
Committee member Finch?
Yes.
Committee member Vance?
Oh, I've lost the meeting.
Yes.
Committee member Zakarian?
Yes.
Committee member Palos?
Yes.
And one more time, committee member Manning? We didn't hear from
Mr.
committee
Manning?
member Manning?
Alan?
Mr. Holtzman, he seems to be having some technical issues. So maybe he can be marked down as an abstention and then can record a vote later, because it seems like he didn't even hear what occurred.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Wait a minute. Let's have the roll. Let's have tallied before Ms. Wilson comment.
Can you, Vlad, can you just read back the vote for us? How many yeses, how many noes?
Yes, we had 2 no's and the rest of them were yeses, except committee member Manning. He didn't vote.
Okay, Ms. Wilson.
Okay, I can accept that the committee voted the way that it voted. However, I just want to plead that we don't get a long exegesis from you of this whole thing. I saw that you spent already several minutes just on number 1 of your list. And I really would like to plead that we not go through every single word on this piece of document that you sent at the very last minute to us. I really would like, I think we should, people can quickly scan it if they wish to. I scanned it as quickly as I could before we even started. I don't need for you to explain every single point on this thing. I've been paying attention throughout our committee meetings. Thank you.
I will do my best to keep it brief, but I would emphasize that, on the committee, there are folks who are, I like to refer to them as pensionistas, people who follow pension issues very, very closely, and others who are somewhat newer to the world of pensions. So I do want to be a little bit careful to make sure, because one of the things I want to do, and this was agreed in the executive committee, is we want to allow members of the committee, in fact, we want to encourage members of the committee who have not spoken up to speak up during this comment period we've discussed. So, but I will nonetheless do my best. So, Luke, would you
One
put
way to encourage them is to keep it brief.
All right, Mr. Milano, I saw another hand, right?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Holson. Here's my my concern is that if we had the committee members prepared to speak today, then they would have relied on information going back perhaps to the very beginning of our meetings, recollecting what we discussed, highlighting the major points. By presenting this set of information this proximate to their presentation. We have a potential bias being created. The bias is based upon the information that is most recent. And that recency bias is a problem for me, because most people, when they present an opinion, they come out with generally what is most present in their memory, and oftentimes forget the nuances of something much more significant. And if your document does not cover many of the other more contentious issues that we discussed in the past, then this is a lot to digest for anybody who's going to base their opinions now based upon this new information. So I would suggest perhaps that we should have them speak first, and then we go through this. In other words, change the order, because they were supposed to be prepared for this presentation today, right? So let's hear them first, and then we can still go through this process, and then follow up if we need to later on.
Point of order, Mr. Holtzman.
Is that a motion?
Sorry, I have Mr. Manning on the line here. He's trying to get on, so I apologize.
Mr.
Yes.
Holtzman, point of order.
Yes.
I believe we had a motion and a vote.
We did.
And while I appreciate you, still allowing some discussion to happen, I think the committee has made clear what they wish to see happen. And so instead of wasting more time, I think we should move forward.
I would agree. Thank you. Thank you for setting me straight. Mr. Milano, I do want to proceed. So I'm going to do that, and we can take hands later. I will not read all of this, though, in deference to Ms. Wilson's comment. Hang on just one second. I'm also having a little bit of computer trouble, which isn't helping. Okay, so dear. One second. See if I can get this back. Okay, so where were we? So I think the important distinction that I'm trying to make here is that the value of withdrawing from CalPERS is that we would be protected from any losses that CalPERS has in the future. So even though you're paying $2.8 billion, you would be protected from losses that CalPERS has in the future. The question, it seems to me, for the committee is, how likely is it, given that it's $2.8 billion as opposed to $600 million in unfunded liability, that CalPERS would lose another $1.8 billion? The committee could ask an actuary to calculate the likelihood of this. In addition, I think the testimony before the committee didn't really establish whether it would be possible to sell $2.8 billion in PLBs, and this too could be further researched. So that's the withdrawal, which I think is going to be the first question that the committee is going to need to answer. Second set of issues, limiting unnecessary increases in pension costs. You will recall that we had a witness towards the end who talked about this, and you can see a couple of the concepts that she presented. Ms. Wentz, I believe was her name, and that includes discouraging Marcia Fritz, I'm sorry, discouraging disability claims, hiring safety engineers to limit claims, avoiding early retirement programs, and a point that I have not verified, but that that delaying retirements would be beneficial for the city. I don't know if that's actually true, and that's something we would have to verify. Determining the use of force positions carefully. Obviously, safety pensions are a great deal more expensive than non-safety pensions. Encouraging, this is an interesting point, which is encouraging people to come laterally to the city, but to discourage people leaving the city, which of course is something the city wants to do anyway. But the point being that the way reciprocity works, that when people leave the city, that we end up paying far more than the point at which they leave the city, that the pension, that we pay the number of years they're here times the pension they ultimately receive, essentially. Okay. Another issue that was raised in particular by Mr. Milano, but has also been raised by others, is increasing transparency and focusing on pension liability in bargaining. These were some options that we developed based on these thoughts. One is CalPERS publishes yearly thresholds for what is essentially the collar, the highest amount of money that you can give in an MOU without incurring unfunded liability, because CalPERS has assumptions built in that assume, I'm going to say very generally, about 2.5% in wage increases plus certain other increases. So focusing on that during the negotiations and publishing whether or not MOUs meet that criterion, whether they'll create additional unfunded liability. The city could enact a policy that requires it to include estimated increase in pension costs in costing for its contract negotiations. The city could also require that all costings and labor negotiations include the additional pension contributions projected by CalPERS due to the increased cost of amortizing unfunded liability. And these aren't really all of the suggestions, but those are the ones that seem salient, at least to me. So creating a policy to accelerate pay down of pension liability, I think this is something that I've sensed pretty broad consensus on from the committee in very, I'll just say in a very short way that the city has done, I think, a commendable job by putting $40 million into its 115 plan. However, there is really no formal policy for putting aside money for the 115 plan. And more critically, maybe, it is clear that the sooner we pay down the unfunded liability, the less ultimately we will pay, and the less length of time will be subject to the volatility as a result of that unfunded liability. There are a number of policy examples. I will wait for people to read these because I don't think it's possible. I'm sorry, Mr. Manning is on the line here. One second. I'm going to see if he can just stay on my line. Just hold on one second.
John?
Alan?
What we decided, and what are we?
Thank you. Mr. Manning is going to be on my phone, and so he'll be able to hear. He just won't be able to see. Okay. There are a number of ways that this could be approached. One is what we can call the Santa Monica model, which Santa Monica, you heard, used a fresh start model, although it didn't officially use the CalPERS fresh start. It essentially recreated it for itself, so it had more flexibility. And that led to essentially steady contributions for a 13-year period, after which, in theory, it should be paid off. There's also another model that I personally am a little enamored of, which is we could look at the difference between funding 6.2% discount rate, which is where people think the discount rate is going to go, and 6.8, look at the difference in cost and put aside the amortized value of that difference. So there are a variety of different approaches here in any event. But and there's a fair amount of detail that I think we'll skip over for now. Then another issue is POBs, apropos of our discussion just a few minutes ago. And so that is something that the committee will need to consider. I will say that I think that no matter what the committee does, it's going to have to say whether or not the committee recommends a validation action. It's going to have to say that it's going to depend on market conditions. Because we can't predict market conditions by the time all this happens. Even if the committee, I mean, there's a possibility the committee may want to say that they don't want to do a POB at all, but if they don't, it would be a question of doing a validation action and seeing what market conditions are. Pursuing higher contributions to CalPERS probably from classic employees. This is how a number of cities have proceeded. It's not a huge amount of money, but you guys pay, your safety folks pay a little bit more than CalPERS requires. 9% is the CalPERS requirement for employee contribution. There are a number of jurisdictions that have moved to 14% or even a little higher than that. And so that is a recommendation that the committee could make. Lobbying and initiatives, there are a number of initiatives that the committee could undertake with other cities, in conjunction with other cities. I have not spent a huge amount of time on these because my sense was that the committee is not super focused on the things it can't specifically control. And I think that's the initial question there is really, do we want to have recommendations about things that the committee doesn't specifically control or not? But there are a number of things that could be done. Some of them are more difficult than, but others are things that, are doable at a legislative level. I just don't know. Again, what the committee's interest is. Okay. Then there was a proposal. I believe, trying to remember whether it was Mr. Milano or Mr. Kadikian, who, and it came also from one of our witnesses, who proposed that we litigate regarding retroactive benefit increases. I think it was Mr. Milano. So we have included that in the interest of completeness. And also from Mr. Milano, the possibility of contracting out city services. So that's an overview. If anybody has any questions of me before we proceed, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Mr. Holtzman.
Mr. Kadikian.
Hi, Mr. Holtzman. I just have a general procedural question. Now, when we are going to comment on this and give our comments or suggestions, are we keeping in mind as to what we think should be a recommendation or what is feasible or unfeasible, or we should simply present all options to City Council, and City Council is smart enough to decide whether that's feasible or not? Because many of these things, we do not know if it's feasible or not. We may assume it's not feasible simply because we don't have enough knowledge or experience. Whereas City Council might say, you know what, I think this is something we can do. And I don't think we should eliminate options for City Council to consider simply because we think it's not feasible. So when we are commenting, are we framing our comments within a scope of what we think is reasonable, or should we just dump everything And City Council, with its wisdom and much more experience, especially when negotiating with these MOUs, they may be in a better position to say if it's feasible or not. You're muted.
Thank you. I'm muted by the host, so I have to wait to get unmuted. I think it's up to each individual about how you want to frame the report. So there's certainly a framing where you just give them the options and you really don't make recommendations. And I think there's a framing where you do, and you say, here are the things we don't recommend, and here are the things we do recommend. So I think it's up to each individual in their both in their spiel and then ultimately in their votes about how they feel the report should be framed. Mr. Milano?
Yes, in listening to the presentation on this particular list that you gave, I think that the comments regarding the openness of the MOU negotiations as presented on your document is much too limited. When I talked about it, I wasn't talking simply with regard to the potential long-term liability of the salary increases on pensions. I was thinking of the whole process being open to the general public, as many cities have done already. Second comment I want to make has to do with Section 115. If I were to count the number of times that support for this Section 115 has been given since we started, it's dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And when we presented, and on top of that, you give your own personal opinion, your role is no longer as a facilitator, right? So it's as a persuader. And the problem with that is that you are looked upon by many individuals in this committee as the authority. So when the authority gives the opinion, it basically skews what the opinions eventually may turn out to be. So presenting the data without giving your opinion, I think, would be most helpful, in my opinion. And you gave your personal opinion on many other items as well. So as we are now doing a summary of the presentations that were done in the past, I think it would behoove us for us to make our own opinions and just present the data as a facilitator. Thank you.
Mr. Michaels.
Thank you. As we spoke this afternoon, I did receive the criticism early on in the work of this committee quite accurately of being focused on the conclusion of our work. And right now we are exactly where I didn't want us to be, where we are down to the last few meetings, we are drawing to a close, and we are now scrambling to try and come to terms with creating what is the report. So when we spoke this afternoon, yes, at this point, I do agree that the way forward is to discuss this document. I had asked for it for quite some time over the past month to be shared and to talk through some of those issues. I would like to take a little bit of time right now just for the committee to determine if the committee members are going to go ahead and give their personal comments with this information, if we want to discuss the framework more as a collective for the time being, and try to figure out as we are drawing to a close, how we can best be most effective in coming to conclusions. My goal with this is to find where there is consensus among the committee and have those be recommendations, but also have the report list all of the potential options and give an opinion of which options we think are worth exploring. So that is my framework of where I'd like to see the final conclusion of the report. And I want to make sure that we do have enough time with the 2.5 meetings we have left to get through that and to have a report that reflects where we have consensus and that gives council as much information as we can provide going forward to make good decisions.
So I guess, Mr. Michaels, I'm a little unclear on what you're suggesting. I guess you're basically saying, do we want to discuss the outline, or do we want to proceed with people speaking?
Correct. I just want to make a clarification of, do we want to continue to have a general discussion of the outline with the full committee? Or are we going to take the time that we have left in this meeting to have people give their personal comments?
I think that's up to the committee. So why don't we ask? Is there a motion? Would you like to make a motion?
May I make a motion? I'd like to move that a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to move that we now start to hear from the individual committee members, and if it so please the committee, maybe we could start with those who have not spoken up in the past, even though it may not be in exact order of alphabetical order or what have you. The other thing I'd like to move as a second thing is that this outline should be part of the agenda packet. I mean, this has come to us. It was not in the agenda packet. So if any members of the public want to know what's in this document, they have no way to know that unless they're speed readers as it flashed by on the video. So I'd really like to recommend that it be somehow made more public. Thank you. Those are my two separate motions, I guess.
Yes.
I second the first motion in that let's go ahead and have some comments on this, and the items on this. This is just a preliminary guideline. I mean, it's not set in stone, is the way I'm seeing it. And let's have a discussion to see where's the next step going to be.
Well, okay, so we have a motion pending to go forward with hearing some comment. Let's take a vote on that so that I can see where everybody is.
Committee member?
One question, just point of inquiry here. Is this any different than the motion that the committee already passed? Do we need to move this again?
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth, but it seems a little different. So I feel like I just want to be clear that, I mean, the suggestion now, the first question was, are we going to go through the outline? That was the question in the last vote. And we agreed, but the majority agreed that we should go through the outline. Now the question is, having gone through the outline, there are two possibilities. One is to discuss the outline, and the other is to proceed as we'd originally planned, with letting people have 3 to 5 minutes to provide their comments.
As I'm the one who raised the issue through discussion, I will go ahead and support Ms. Wilson's motion to go ahead and start the individual comments. I just wanted to come to a conclusion that we had finished discussing the outline in general, and that we would be ready for the individual comments.
Yeah, so let me just say one thing. Mr. Kadikian said something very true here, which is this is a work in progress. This is not written in stone. I have already heard from Mr. Milano saying we kind of shorted one of his points, and we will absolutely fix that, because I do want this to encapsulate the conversation of the committee so that the committee can make decisions about what should or shouldn't be in the report. So with that, let me do this. I would like volunteers from the folks who, and you know who you are, who don't speak all the time. And Mr. Wentz is actually, thank you very much for volunteering.
No problem. Excuse me. First off, I want to thank you for putting this together. This is exactly something I was looking for, this outline in this document. So though I can appreciate that it was given to us with a little bit of time, or not that much time, and going through it, as anticlimactic as this might be, don't have anything I would take out or anything I would put in. I think it's a fair representation of what we talked about and the information that was presented to us. I think it's a good starting point for us to then start to delve into expanding or taking out some of the information. But I'm more than comfortable with the information that's in there and the outline as it sits.
Thank you. Okay, may I have another hand? Otherwise, I'm going to start calling on people. Ms. Finch, I see you volunteering.
Oh, I did? I was just kidding.
I lied. I lied.
No, I agree with Mike Wentz that I appreciate the document. I do think it captures everything that we need to. And like discussed in the executive committee, whether we just give each member or of the committee a chance to go through like what their thoughts are in the entire document, or if you want to break it up point by point and just go, what does everybody think of point number 1, point number 2? It just is a way to start going through the document. I appreciate the thoughts written down. As I agree with Mr. Wentz, I think that it captures everything that we've kind of gone through in this committee.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Zakarian.
Yes, sir. Overall, I believe that the outline, to echo what Mike Wentz was saying, is pretty much similar and to my thoughts. Some other comments I have on the overall grand scheme of things and how we will illustrate it, or what my perspective is. Neither right or wrong. It's just a different perspective from a different lens, and taking account to everything and all the speakers that we've had. Essentially, I feel like sometimes we keep going round and round over some of the same motions or some of the same arguments or speaking points of pretty much moving money around. This is just my view. It is my perspective from my lens. Like I said before, prefaced it with neither right or wrong, just a little different from everybody else's. But a good thing that CalPERS says is essentially bankrupting the city if we go away with CalPERS, or putting pressure on employees to possibly not be retained over here or be moving somewhere else, would be losing employees. And, essentially what is the reason why we're doing it if our overall reason as city employees is to keep the city safe and sound and keep the city running as we are a growing city. Thanks to our city executive staff, our city council who's kept this city moving over the years. And that's the reason why we are the greatest city in Southern California. Other than that, I'd like to thank you, John, for putting all this together, being a coordinator. Your work is not going unnoticed or unacknowledged. So thank you for that. I appreciate your help and the time and effort you put in. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Macias.
Yeah, briefly looking over the proposal and everything, if we're just trying to state what we like or don't like, I would be strongly in favor with the portions 4B1 and then section 5. I think those are probably the best and most economical way forward.
Thank you. Mr. Manning, who is back, by the way. Well, maybe he's not back. Okay. Mr. Palos.
Oh, thank you. I'm in agreement with Ara and Wentz and Finch. This document is a good starting point for different options that the city can look at. But kind of going off of what Ara had mentioned, withdrawing from CalPERS would mean a lot of city employees leaving the city if there's not a comparable pension. That's one of the reasons why a lot of employees come to the city. But this document here, I think, is good to start off with. Again, going through each point on the document one by one, and giving us time to go over it and do some more evaluating of it would be very helpful. But yeah, I'm gonna agree with Wentz and Finch and Zakarian.
Good news here is that after this session, before next session, when I'm going to be asking for specific votes on what gets included or not, you will have the time between the sessions, obviously, to review this. Mr. Bain.
Yeah, I would like to, as several people, thank you for putting this together. I think it's important to present most of the material that is in this report as part of our report. We can have our recommendations, but I think it's important to let the city council know the different possibilities that we considered in reaching any conclusions or recommendations. I also think that item 3 is a critical item to controlling costs long-term. However you want to word it, having some understanding of what excess raises costs way beyond the current cost, to the salaries. And I think that is significantly understated or misunderstood or not even considered at all as part of the process. So I would strongly encourage that, along with the pay down, being some critical factors. I'm not a big proponent of borrowing money to give it to somebody else to invest. That's a little like taking out a big mortgage on your house so you can go play in the market. And well, some people do well at that. I'm a little more conservative than wanting to go try that.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Kadikian.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. And well, you have a lot of patience, and that's great for what you do. So, thank you again, your patience and thing. So I'm going to go item by item here, just so that the report, when it's presented, as Mr. Bain indicated, it should be a complete report of everything we discussed. And then at the end, if we're going to put some sort of a recommendation and how the committee votes, that's fine. But with regards to withdrawal from CalPERS, I think it's important that we indicate that CalPERS is not an organization who's looking out for the best interest of the city, that back in 2000 or 2001, there was a failure of leadership, there was failure of understanding, and that if we are voting no to withdraw from CalPERS, we're doing it with holding our nose and knowing that we're in a chokehold and we don't have any option. So I don't want to sugarcoat that, oh, the only reason we're not going out of CalPERS is because it's going to cost too much money. No. It costs too much money now because CalPERS is looking out for its best interest, and there's substantial failure in leadership as to what got us here. So that's with regards to item number 1. With regards to item number 2, I agree. We should limit unnecessary increases to pension cost, particularly anything that, these suggestions are good, and maybe we should look if there's other options that we can explore. That's not my area, and we brought all the experts that we could, I assume. So these are good options, but again, I think they should be adopted. With regards to 3, establishing greater transparency. Now, I need much more on this. I just don't understand why we can't have some sort of a taxpayer advocates or open meetings where, we can clearly see who is kind of like going for the jugular and try to squeeze as much as they can from the city, as opposed to making everybody look like, oh, we're just, playing kumbaya with each other here and we just want to get along. I doubt those MOU negotiations go that way. And I think the public should see that. And, and that's why I'd like a lot more transparency on those bargainings. With regards to 4, policy for pay down, I absolutely agree. We should pay it down as fast as we can. Now, with regards to section 115, I want to be clear that I do not support it because it creates a false sense that everything is perfect, that we don't have any problems, and it just perpetuates that we have the budget, therefore we can spend. So I'd like that concept at least addressed in there, that section 115 trust creates a false sense of security, all right? Which, perpetuates business as usual, which I don't think is a good way of solving the problem that we have. With regards to item number 6, I don't have comments about pension obligation bonds. I agree with Mr. Bain. That's just, trading one gamble to the other gamble. With regards to number 6, pursue higher employee contributions to CalPERS. Absolutely, I think we should do that. And having these MOU meetings public and open will increase our chances to get higher contributions. And when we do, we shouldn't do it by increasing salaries at the same time to offset one versus the other, which basically not only doesn't solve the problem, it makes the problem even worse. With regards to number 7, I think it's absolutely important that we do lobbying initiatives. And again, this is one of the areas where our limited experience here should not be limiting in telling the city council what they should do. I mean, I don't know how much lobbying any of our members, including myself, have done. I haven't done any lobbying, but city council certainly has, and they are in much better position to talk with other cities. And definitely we should have coordination with other cities to address this. And this is something definitely we should let city council know about, encourage them if it's within their capability to do, as opposed to eliminating them, even though we ourselves have limited experience in this area. With regards to 8, litigation regarding retroactive benefit enhancement, this goes hands in hands with exiting CalPERS. So if we're not going to exit CalPERS, then this is maybe you could try it for leverage to get better MOUs or what have you. That's something to be considered only if, and again, this wouldn't be necessary if we have open MOU discussions where people can see exactly who is trying to get as much as possible out of these negotiations. And contract with city services, I think that's an option that should always be available. I don't think things should be taken off the table because we think, oh, that's politically not viable, therefore we shouldn't suggest it. We put it to city council. If somebody on city council somehow managed to get themselves elected with a promise of contracting for services, then hey, why not? The public wants it. But I don't think we ourselves should make the determination that this is politically not feasible and therefore exclude it. Those are my comments on this. And the purpose of my comments is just to reflect this information into this outline.
Mr. Holtzman.
Yes, sir.
I just want to say I'm not a committee member and I don't get a vote, and that's not what the intent of my comment right now is intended to be. So I don't want it to be misunderstood. But with respect to at least one of the items on here that Mr. Gadikian mentioned, would it be helpful Mr. Gadikian, for something like the Section 115 trust to go one step further and actually suggest or recommend how that 115 trust should be structured, how, what the purpose of it,
Point of order.
when the drawdown should occur based on what we know actuarially, or do you want to leave it entirely, significantly broader than that?
I believe there's a point of order raised.
Let me answer the question of John first. John, that's a good question. Fundamentally, I am opposed to the Section 115 trust because if you remember my presentation, that's just there. You're giving something without getting anything in return. You're giving security and the illusion that we don't have this 640 million debt obligation that we have to pay without putting any kind of pressure on getting that paid. So if we're going to find, and as I said in my presentation, if we are going to fund a Section 115 trust, I definitely would like open MOUs, taxpayer advocate in there. The idea is that we want to get the political process out of those MOU negotiations because what I don't want to happen, what I see happen, is politicians pursuing employee groups or unions for endorsements, and subsequently after the endorsements, there is MOUs which are negotiated in secret, and suddenly people are saying, oh, we're paying more to our pension obligations by X%. Oh, by the way, also, we are getting a raise of the same amount, which creates the same problem. So it's not that I am against the 115 trust. It's just that I'd like some sort of a control to make sure we benefit from it.
Certainly, and that's the reason I asked the question. I'm not trying to advance or advocate for anything beyond what exists today. But today, a 115 trust has been established. There's 40 some odd $1 million in it. And really, my question to the committee is, as we move forward, where that money can only be used for very specific things. I would ask this committee to consider coming up with, as part of their recommendation, some sort of a policy recommendation of how, in what manner those funds should be used, as opposed to having a 115 trust and continue to put money towards a balance. Let's figure out what the purpose of this actually is. Do we use it to smooth over a few years of the rates and then just stop putting money into it? Or do we use this as a method of accruing funds to pay down the debt, sort of like a fresh start? These are all things that I think the committee has the ability to do. It just depends on how much depth you want to go into.
Definitely things to discuss, yes.
Mr. Manning is next, but there's a point of order by Mr. Milano, so take him.
And I want to address the interjection by Mr. Taktaklian. He prefaced it by saying, I'm not a committee member, but I will continue to add as a rebuttal to the comments made by Mr. Kadiki.
Not how it happened, but go on.
Well, I'm not discussing the merits of your comments with regard to it, but we are already in violation of the Brown Act by going through this process of discussing this particular list given to us by the facilitator, Mr. Holzman, right? Which in a way limits our range of topics that we could have been discussing. And on top of that, this looks like and acts like agenda items for which were not given to the public in advance. It doesn't matter that we voted on this thing or that the majority voted to basically put it on. It's a violation of the Brown Act, in my contention. And I want to keep everyone aware, and I want this to be on the minutes, that I made this particular point of order with regard to the issue that this particular list is a violation of the Brown Act, the continuation of all of these topics, and the addition of commentary by the staff, I'm not a committee member, is also a violation of the Brown Act. So that's what I want to make sure it gets in the minutes.
Ms. Wolfson.
Mr. Holtzman, can we have Mr. Garcia? We have an attorney here who represents the city and is giving the board.
I think Mr. Manning is next for his comments. Mr. Manning has had his hand up for a while.
Thank you, Ms. Wolfson. Mr. Holtzman, there was
let me just ask Mr. Garcia if he'd like to add anything.
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to briefly address that comment. Again, the discussion of the report is part of the agenda. That's the primary purpose for this meeting. So certainly, and it's not the end of the discussion. It's gonna carry on at a subsequent meeting. So I don't see the Brown Act violation because this was specifically what was listed on the agenda. And then again, I took, just to the other point, I took Mr. Taktalian's comment as a question for the commenter, not a comment on his own. So I don't necessarily see that as improperly injecting his own opinion. He was trying to get some additional commentary on that particular point, because at the end of the day, Mr. Holtzman's going to have to put this report together, and so it's going to have to be based on our clear understanding of what it is that the committee is providing direction on, and that's all I took it as.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Garcia. Mr. Manning, finally. I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me, number one?
I can.
Wow, how about that? I just was able to rejoin the meeting. I missed most of what, the presentation, the discussion of the list that was put together. There is there have been statements that CalPERS is not transparent with their investments, and I don't see that because on CalPERS's homepage on the internet, which is calpers.ca.gov, at the top, if you click on investments, and then you click on About the Investment Office, and then click on Investment and Financial Reports, you get a number of reports that are then available to you if you click on them, including the most recent 4 and investment reports. The 2020-2021 report, which is the most recent, is 319 pages long and lists the maturity date, the par value, the book value, and the market value of every security held in the portfolio, I believe, as of the end of that period. However, one thing that it doesn't do, and maybe this is the crux, it does not list the underlying investments made by REITs and private investment vehicles. However, I would point out that underlying investments of private investment vehicles held by public pension and retirement plans are exempt by California law from disclosure. That's under the California Public Records Act. So when we're talking about complaining to the SEC or complaining to the FBI, I just don't understand that. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Mr. Manning, if you would, maybe, I don't know, because I know you did miss the central piece. You may not want to speak tonight on some of the broader issues and recommendations, but if you are prepared to do so, it'd be a good time.
Well, just a few things is that I know that it's been suggested that Glendale pursue litigation to try to unwind everything in a way back to 20-some years ago. I don't see that is a viable suggestion. If Glendale has a cause of action, so does almost every other jurisdiction in California. And where would the money come to make everybody whole? I guess the answer would be the taxpayers. So I don't think that would go anywhere. I don't think that we should pursue that. I'm opposed to exiting CalPERS. I think it's too expensive. And I think that what we have, yes, we do have a problem with with our unfunded liability, but I believe that if we continue, if we propose solutions around, or we propose actions to take around the edges to pay down our liability sooner, that sometime within the next 10 years, we'll get to kind of a crossover point where the amount that we're paying every year will be going down. So I don't want to make light of it, but I think that it is not a permanent problem. I think it's a problem that is manageable. So I think that we should suggest various strategies that the city council could adopt. But I don't think that any extreme recommendations are warranted. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. All right, I think we're getting down to our veterans here. I'm going to try to choose people in the order they didn't speak over the course of, of a few months. Let's start with Mr. Michaels.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. I do appreciate the framework of your document, but my comments as I'm looking at this, I'm looking longer term. My goal for the city is to develop a pension policy that results in a stable, robust, well-funded pension that is a benefit to the city as well as the employees. And looking down that road 20, 25 years out, I would reach the conclusion that the city should try to move towards a defined contribution plan rather than a defined benefit. That way, the city is budgeting and guaranteeing the money that they are putting in. They are not guaranteeing what the payout is and what the investments are. That would be shifted to the employee as a risk as part of their bargaining and negotiation. And much like the rest of private industry, the city employees would have control or some control over what investments they have in their retirement plan. Now, getting to that is going to be a very long-term process. I do not see getting out of CalPERS right now all at once as a viable option, but getting to a completely different retirement plan where the contributions are guaranteed rather than the benefits, that is going to take getting out of CalPERS as it's organized now and having this and requiring the city to create an existing defined benefits plan, as well as a new defined contribution plan for new employees. Because my understanding as we do exit CalPERS, we will need to transition from CalPERS with those employees that are still under a defined benefit plan into a defined benefit plan that the city would have to run and operate. So getting to that as a long-term goal, that is where I would like to, that's my recommendation coming from this committee going to city council. Looking at some of the details of how to get there, again, that is a long-term approach, and there is a lot of analysis that is needed. I have requested analysis on things like the pension obligation bonds, and there was the discussion of the 115 trust, how that is to be used. Looking at the discussion of pension obligation bonds at the start of this meeting, a lot of that has to do with what the current market rates are, what the situation is going to be this year, 5, 10 years from now. So a lot of that, my recommendations are going to be more goal setting for what I would like to see the council achieve, and working more towards creating that long-term policy, touching on things that may be controversial like outsourcing city services. I do want to see all options on the table. I'm not ruling anything out, but I do want there to be enough time to analyze that as an option. If we are talking about outsourcing city services for cost savings, I would also like to see an analysis of what those projected cost savings would be, as well as asking the various departments, can they achieve those goals within the department, and having the city retain direct control over their services. So with this framework, I do want to go ahead and hear everyone's comments and get into some of the specific recommendations, but I do want to try and encourage the committee to come up with a longer term goal of what the retirement plans and what that policy is going to be 25 years out.
Ms. Wilson has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Holzman. First of all, I want to say it's certainly a good start, the outline. You know, it's just that I regret that we didn't have more time to consider it before we were called upon to make comments about it. So I would again like to express my wish for it to be somehow distributed as part of the agenda packet, at least for next time, so people, you know, I know there are also some committee members who aren't even in attendance tonight. So that's one comment that I have. I think we do need to flesh it out a little bit. I also, as you know, I submitted something for the committee to consider. It certainly was not meant to be definitive, although as I started writing, you know, I just started running with it. But one of the things that I included, which I think is good, is sort of an introductory section where I talked about why we're doing what we're doing and how we want to be proactive, and also to list all of the presentations that we saw and the dates that we saw them. So if the public, members of the public or the council members who have very little time, of course, being very busy, then they have a chance to revisit those agenda packets or the videos and get more information so that we don't have to repeat everything in our report to them. While we do want to give them a lot of information, we don't have to repeat verbatim everything that was said to us. Two things I do want to say about some comments that have been made this evening. I think the transparency issue with CalPERS isn't so much that they don't have a list of the investments on their website, as it is that they don't provide the kind of investment information to their customers that is normally presented to investors, like prospectuses and so forth. They make these decisions by fiat, and the working members of our staff are depending on them making good decisions for their financial security in the future. And that's the concern that many of us have. They also are not transparent as to the campaign finance of their board elections, which is, to me, a red flag. The second thing I want to say is that the city does offer already a defined contribution plan to its employees in the form of what's known as a 457 plan. 457 refers to an Internal Revenue Code section, and that is essentially analogous to a 401k that people get in their private industry jobs. So I don't know that transitioning in that direction is really a radical change from what's already offered to the employees. I do think that a lot of the points you've made in your outline are very germane and will be helpful. We're not making the decision for council, but we are presenting the options. And while I think we can express our opinions, we're not called upon just to ask questions. We're here on the committee because we have opinions and because we have professional expertise to share. And so therefore, I feel like it's okay for us to express opinions about what we think are the advantages and disadvantages of their various options. But again, it will be up to council to make the decision. Thank you.
Mr. Holtzman, may I just make one comment?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Ms. Wolfson is correct. We do have a 457 plan, but it is voluntary and it's based on employee contributions. There are no city contributions. There is no city match as you would see in, let's say, a typical 401k where they match up to, you know, the first 6%, some percentage thereof. So I just wanted to clarify that for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. I do want to say, though, that the company I work for does not match the.
No. Oh, right.
So that's not a given everywhere that they match. Thank you.
That is correct. Thank you.
Mr. Amirian.
Thank you, Mr. Holtzman. I also would like to echo the committee members that expressed appreciation for the work that you've done as our facilitator and also in providing us with this outline. I do think that we the report should mention, the universe of possibilities as far as pensions in order to be complete. I think that's extremely important that those are outlined. And I also think it's extremely important that this committee come to a consensus about what aspects of that universe of possible options are simply not something that we would recommend that city council or staff spend their time on. Personally speaking, I think that the idea of leaving CalPERS, considering what the impact of that would be on the city, is simply a non-starter. And one of the things I'd like to say is it's a shame to me, because there are a lot of things that I agree with in terms of being a fiscal conservative myself, and just a conservative in general. It's really interesting. It's really interesting to me that there's this differentiation made about, hey, let's, if you're a conservative or if you have this political view, then you must be against pensions, period, end of story, and we have to get out of CalPERS. Were mistakes made? Sure. Do I think that we need to spend a lot of time pointing fingers in this report? No, because quite frankly, in the sense of mentioning that there were, mistakes, I think it's good to document that, and I think it's clear. It really is clear to everybody involved. We wouldn't be here speaking about pension reform as a blue ribbon committee if there weren't mistakes made in the past. And it is important to document some of that in order to avoid repeating them. However, bad faith insinuations, especially ones that aren't supported by, incredibly clear and hard evidence, I don't think is very helpful. Now, in terms of what we need to do and what we need to recommend, any recommendation we make is subject to who is on city council at the time they consider any of those recommendations. And quite frankly, a future city council can change that. So really, the most important thing here, and one of the things in terms of legislation, in terms of how CalPERS is formed and governed under state law, all of that stems down to a very simple premise: elections matter. And so this idea of spearheading legislative change, I don't think that's the responsibility of the city staff or the city council per se. I've seen recommendations about writing letters to the SEC or reporting things to people. Hey, as a citizen here in the United States, you can write a letter to whomever you'd like and bring that to their attention. So I am more than open to any of these committee members, and quite frankly, any person writing any letter that they so choose. As far as this committee is concerned, I think that the idea of exploring, codifying, or having a set of principles defined for how the 115 trust is used, I think is very important. That's something that we already have a 115 fund in the city. It's already being used. And really, to echo, Mr. Manning earlier, all of the information we've been presented, the kind of the danger zone for the city of Glendale specifically, we're not talking about other municipalities who weren't as responsible as the city of Glendale was. We're talking about the city of Glendale. That danger zone is coming in the next few years for about a 5 to 7 year period where it's more than handleable as long as we fall within that 25 to 75% zone. Okay. Planning and mitigating for extreme events is I think very important, and we should. Pension obligation bonds, I tend to agree with some of my fellow committee members. I think it should be explored by the city, but I also think that we're being a little bit, I would say, not ignorant, but ignoring, how complex the situation is there. Because pension obligation bonds, it's not just as simple as, oh, let's put out this bond of several $100 million, the total of the unfunded liability, give it to somebody else, to invest. No, there have to be strict boundaries and considerations even before any of that pension obligation bond is spent. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for more risk than you're trying to mitigate. Obviously, timing is of the essence. So I think it was Ms. Harrell who suggested that the validation process be explored and then a decision can be made if we want to go for that. I think that might be a good suggestion for city staff and city council to consider, in terms of pension obligation bonds. But quite frankly, I don't consider a pension obligation bond pension reform because, a city taking on debt, it's going to affect our ability to take on debt for other issues. And that debt that we take on is never going to be considered a positive. It's always going to be considered a liability, no matter what the reason is, and no matter what we think that split or difference is going to be. Just thinking about looking at a couple of the other things that were mentioned, I'm all for more transparency. As the chair of the audit committee for the city of Glendale, I believe that the city does a tremendous job, especially in the past decade, of transparency in every aspect of financial decisions that they make. Is there an opportunity for more transparency in terms of the bargaining? Yes, but I think that it's also, you have to consider what bargaining looks like and how, in any other sense, bargaining that is happening in public can sometimes undermine the, one party or the other and actually create an outcome that is worse than, whether that bargaining could happen in good faith, between the person that's designated as the person who's bargaining on behalf of the city and the employee groups. Pursuing a faster payback. I mean, it's one of the first things that was mentioned, and I think it's one of the things that should most seriously be considered. Now, as someone who's been involved, in audit for as long as I have, I know that the city is very, very, very particular about efficiency in terms of what services it offers to the residents and what the trade-offs would be. And I imagine a lot of the decisions that have been made have already been informed with that metric in mind. However, I do think there's an opportunity here, especially with some of those high increases coming, for staff to look and see, is there an opportunity to potentially accelerate these payments, which might result in an increase of about $8 to $12 million, let's say, for example, a year during that tough time, but would end up saving us, $100 million in interest payments. And so that balance, it has to be evaluated by staff, and the decision again rests with city council. And I think that's something that should be in our report. I do appreciate all the other committee members. I appreciate their opinions and the time that they've spent. It has been a difficult process, but these difficult processes are an important part of us getting to the end. I do believe that every single person on this committee, in their own way, has the best interests of the city of Glendale in mind. And I would hope that they continue to assume maximal good faith of the fine individuals that I personally know work for the city of Glendale. And I'm looking forward to, the first, kind of complete draft of your report, and and as a committee, offering some more fine-tuned, votes, just straight out votes, just like we did today. Motion to vote on, for example, not recommending exiting CalPERS. Get yes, 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 no, no, yes, 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 tally it up, great, go with that. Because I think we've spent enough time going back and forth, about, what the merits are. And it's time for us to kind of codify and finish this process in a way that, by the way, reflects not just well on us as a committee, but on the city council members that appointed each of us, and all of the staff members, by the way, who have participated in this process, tirelessly, I know, have answered every question posed to them. And so, again, my appreciation to everybody, and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And let me just say, to be clear, although I was going to say this at the end, it is my intention next week to take us through votes, preliminary votes, obviously, because we'll have a final report, but to take us through votes on these issues. And I do hope that everybody will be prepared to do that. Okay, Mr. Milano, you're on. Not. Mr. Milano?
I stunned him into silence.
Yes, apparently. Mr. Milano?
Looks like he's dropped off the meeting.
Well, he's muted, but he's still there.
Maybe somebody else could make their comments.
Mr. Milano?
It seems like I lost everybody in the process. Did anybody experience the same thing?
No, I think it was you. But you're on.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, as we are winding down the process, I want to know that I want everyone to know really that the process I was expecting it to be difficult and contentious, and I recognize that the opinions that we have is often based on the experiences and the knowledge that we have and that we can come in with. So for those individuals who came in with the actuarial background, I really appreciated those comments. For those that came out with the legal background, I appreciated those as well. And I like the fact that that everyone representing the city's employee associations was here, because the perception that I have about how to present this document differs significantly from the way that you have structured, Mr. Holzman. My approach will be very different. Because at the end of the day, it seems like we lost the concept as to why is it that we are here, right? Why is it that Mr. Councilman Najarian said, that this was an existential problem for the city, right? And I wanted to emphasize that because we are here for a reason, right? It's not only that we have as of last year, a $640 million unfunded, right, liability, actuarial liability. It's also the fact that before these changes occurred in 2001, this whole city, all payments from the employees and the city was only $8 million. And the following year, it was only $8 million. And today is $73 million, approximately, right? And you look at that exponential cost, right? We're talking about, on just the unfunded liability, about $8,000 per family, right? If we were to just say, hey, let's just give a check to everyone, a bill, and have them pay it. It's significant. If we were to take the total liability, it would be even much greater. And so without presenting where we are financially, what the impact has been if we do nothing. Well, let's figure it out, right? Let's figure out some projections if we do absolutely nothing. Today, the pension cost is approaching 50%, my opinion, of the general fund. And it may increase significantly more. Today, for police and fire, the pension cost is 60% of their salaries. And looking at the trends that we have, it may well wind up to 90% of the salaries, right? So when you present the salaries combined, the total package, we have some astronomical numbers, and we did not spend much time discussing salaries, the trends, right? The changes that have occurred in the past 20 years. So we know that the pension obligation, in part, right? One of the pillars that impacts it is the salaries and the salaries increases and the steps. So when we say, look, it's okay to adjust it for inflation, but if all of a sudden you decided to say, well, then instead of 9 steps at 5% per step, we're going to increase it 3 more. Well, you change on the one hand the salary steps, you add the inflation rate, and they say, okay, but now contribute a little bit more towards your pension. Well, we already offset it. So what is the impact on the city where you have a cost that is increasing exponentially? And what does the city do without as a result of it? If you think about it, those $640 million would have paid, my God, for maybe 500 homes completely to be given, if we were to do that, right? To individuals who need housing, 500 housing units, and when we add all of the additional payments that we have made, it could probably be 800 housing units that would have created, right? It has an impact, right? I tried to mention in my previous presentation, the shortage of parkland in Glendale that has lasted for maybe 30, 40 years south of the 134. The pension obligation, that additional funds that goes out of the general fund and all the other funds, because they're basically all moved around. They're kind of, in a way, somewhat fungible when you look at the big picture, has an impact on the city. So you have these costs that are increasing exponentially, and that's why we're here, to figure out how do we correct it. I agree with Mr. Amirian with this concept that a bond is not a new bond is not pension reform. Absolutely spot on. But without the clarification as to how this thing has impacted the city, and be clear, we start with this preamble, right? We have suffered the following financial impact to the city of Glendale as a result of what occurred back in 2001. And obviously my investigations on the documents that led to that are incredibly troubling. And I would like to post that later on, in our shared file location. We did not discuss the number of employees. Right? If you increase the number of employees, you're going to have a higher pension. And I want to show that graph when we had those amazing increase in the number of employees between 2001 going forward to 2005 and being maintained for a long time. We never discussed that. And number of employees, the amount of pay, right? All of those impact the pension system, and we hardly spend any time on it. Let's take a look at the various different claims that were repeated again and again. If we do not maintain a defined pension benefit, we will not be able to hire appropriately, or will be very difficult to hire. Now, everybody tested that? Because I decided to check on the University of Southern California. They do not have a defined benefit plan, right? They provide a matching up to 5% and another 5% on the 401k. That's it. No defined pension benefit anywhere. So how do they manage to hire accountants and CPAs and engineers, right? And their own internal police and investigations and so forth? How do they do it, right? So we never question it. We just simply accept, oh, it's going to be difficult and we won't be able to. Well, I believe that we never spent much time really testing whether those particular claims were true. The issue about lobbying. Well, I have experience lobbying, and I've gone to Sacramento to lobby, particularly in the housing industry. So, and I've been successful, at least with the group that I was in, to basically exert enough influence to get some of our positions understood and accepted. But every year, you know, dozens upon dozens of laws are being passed. There's nothing unusual about that. What it was PEPRA, right? If not, was it a legislative action? It was, I believe, pushed and signed by the governor. So no, the fact that it may be difficult should not dissuade us from trying out something that is truly significant and that merits change. But our experience and our prior experience has a lot to do with it. So we haven't explored many areas, and in our report, it should define for the city, this is the problem that we're trying to correct, not just the immediate $640 million funded liability, is what were the processes that led to it? And so we have arguments and have claims. One of the claims that was made several times with concern the problems that we may have with regard to an open negotiation process. Well, I looked into the cities that actually have an open negotiation process, right? And it's not like most people imagine it. There are some closed door negotiations when they're defining the tactics, but the process is open to the public for many cities. So advocating that we have a clear and transparent process is could be a significant benefit, because what if we had actuarial individuals, right, like some of our members, listening and watching that and basically calling in and saying, wait a second, City Council, you cannot accept that particular claim that they're making here, that for the next 18 years will have zero cost, right? That was the claim made in 2001. That if you increase the benefits by 50% where nobody gave any money towards the additional benefit, not the employee, not the city, that somehow magically we can basically be able to pay for it because they trusted that CalPERS would be able to provide it. When it comes to actually foretelling or predicting what the future return on investments might be, I look at the last 20 years. We have exact figures of what transpired. And to say, well, no, let's disregard that. We're just going to make predictions that it cannot be done. Well, we have the reality of what has actually transpired, right? An 8.25%, should we say, estimate, and a reality of 5.5. So what are the chances, right, that CalPERS will continue? What is the probability? Well, you based it upon what has transpired in something very tangible, very real. And so the situation for the city of Glendale financially is significant and is serious. That's why we're here. And we need to frame the report such as whoever reads it understands the magnitude of the problem if we do nothing, or if we just simply nibble at the edges of the problem. And so I think that the report needs many more sections that addresses the issues that I just stated. You know, this is a good start, Mr. Holtzman. But I believe that we need to contribute additional chapters to this document for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Let me just say one thing, a couple of things actually. So this document has to do with our recommendations. There will be a preamble to this document that will talk through I guess a problem statement, and there may be disagreement about, you know, the extent of well, the source of it, et cetera. And I don't know, and I don't know how far I'm going to get into that. But when you see a draft of this, it will include an analysis of the problem. Whether that satisfies all of your concerns is a different issue, obviously, and you may want, you know, to add a concurring opinion or dissenting opinion or whatever. But I do want to emphasize this was and is an attempt to get to the recommendations. It is not an outline of the entire report. So I think it's important to understand that. I felt, and I think most of the committee members agree that the most critical thing was to get to consensus or as close as we can on the recommendations. And so just so you know, I guess as to the issue, I will add a set of options around what we in the bargaining world refer to as fishbowl negotiations, which is sort of the ultimate transparent negotiations. I'll add a section on that, which obviously people can vote on and decide whether that they want that to be a recommendation or not. So to be clear, I will address your concern in the next draft. Ms. Wilson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Holzman. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I think that's a great idea to, expand and make sure that all of the possible actions that City Council could choose to take are on the table. I have a feeling that the committee will never arrive at complete consensus. So I would advocate that we put out there all of the options and let them make the ultimate decision without us saying, oh, we're ruling out this, that, or the other, because, I think as we've seen this evening, there's a lot of disagreement. I did want to say something, and I hope that you'll indulge me for a few moments. As some of you know, my dog died in February, and it was a very difficult situation. And due to that, I was unable to stay for the entire meeting on February 22nd. And so because I feel I take my responsibility very seriously on this committee to be prepared and to be knowledgeable about everything that's been discussed. And so I watched the video of that meeting, and there was something that happened at the end of the video that I found extremely upsetting and appalling. And there was about an 8-minute diatribe by a committee member in which he was criticizing and sort of smearing with a bad paintbrush other members of the committee without naming who they are. And I just want to say I was very disappointed that you didn't cut that off right away at the pass, Mr. Holzman. I feel that sometimes this committee has operated not so fairly to some of us who are on the committee, and it has not gone without me noticing it. At least I can't speak for anyone else, but I know that members of the public have commented to me about things that they've seen when they watch the video. Not everybody phones in to the committee that watches the video. So you might be surprised at how people view what has happened here. I just want to say that I hope that everyone realizes that this is a public forum, and it's really not okay to do that. All right, thank you.
Let me just say, from my own perspective, that there has been some heated rhetoric. It's not from one person. It's from a number of people. And I think I've made it very clear what my view of it is, but it is not entirely my job, in my view, and you can disagree with me, to censor the comments of committee members. I have encouraged everybody, and I think tonight is a good example of some very good dialogue, some excellent dialogue, and recognition of the validity of each other's points. That hasn't always happened. I understand that, and if you want to criticize me for not cutting people off, I've certainly heard it before from a number of people, and I don't disagree with you about your sentiment about those kinds of comments, to be clear. But I do disagree to some extent about, I've heard many times people say you should cut this person off, you should cut that person off. I'm sorry if that's not my approach. I was raised Quaker, and I believe in hearing people out. So that's my view, but I do appreciate yours.
I want to be clear. I'm not talking about cutting people off for their opinions about the substantive issues. I mean cutting people off when they claim that other committee members are talking too much or taking up too much of their precious time, that sort of thing. I'm not talking about substantive discussion of the issues. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Okay, we are at the end of our time, and so I want to be clear about what my thoughts and expectations are for next week. We will, in fact, include this outline with some amendments from tonight in the agenda packet. I hope to issue that early in the week, but in the meantime, you have the guts of what's going to, there's not going to be a lot of change, but I am going to do the things I said I was going to do. And next week, I'm hoping that we can march through these possible recommendations. Some people may want to, and I've heard this sentiment, simply put these out with no specific recommendation from the committee. I understand that. I don't know what the sentiment of the committee is on that issue, but I think I sense that there's that certainly quite a number of members of the committee would like to see some recommendations. I think, you know, I guess my view doesn't really count. It's going to be up to you guys, but I think people are counting on us to make some recommendations. So I guess I'd like to see that. Mr. Zakarian, I'm sorry. I forgot all about you. You raised your hand earlier.
No worries, sir. I wanted to let you get your time in, and my question was kind of similar to the last one. Was, you know, it's not too far-fetched to say that a lot of us are not going to agree, or you know, we're not all going to agree on one thing. So, what do you recommend? You being the professional who's guided this in such a great way and done a lot of work for us, what do you recommend we do if we're not all coming to one? I guess similar vote on how we want to approach this to city council. My second point is, you know, the options will always be there. The options have always been there. And I believe that as a committee, we've put in a lot of work collectively, everybody, to just kind of make options available, because those options will always be there. Options were there 20 years ago, and options will be there, you know, 20, 25 years from now. So do you recommend, with your professional experience of making it a recommendation, how do we go about that? And if we all don't agree to it, then what would be our next step? And I don't have the answer to it.
Sure.
I go off of what you say, because you are the professional. You've been through this. So I take your word, you know, at a very, very good
thank you. Motion. Well, first of all, let me say I started this process with hair. My suggestion is the following, but again, this is just my suggestion. I would like to see votes on the major recommendations, and I believe that we should probably list those votes, not by name, but by numbers. I don't think it's, you know, appropriate to call people out on what they voted on and didn't vote on, you know, on these various proposals. Some people may want to simply abstain, saying we should just present it as is, and I think that's fine too. In addition, you know, it had been my anticipation, knowing the strength of some folks' view, that some folks may want to write, you know, what I'll call a concurring. This is in the law. We talk about concurring or dissenting opinions, right? And so, and that we would attach those to the report. Those would be signed, obviously, by individuals or even groups of individuals. You know, I am, you know, hopeful that we can reach, you know, a strong consensus on some proposals. I recognize there are going to be some proposals that we're not, and you know, you know, I think everybody has heard most sides of most of these issues at this point, and is in a very good position to state their position. So that's my recommendation, is that we record a numerical vote for these recommendations. By the way, I think the final numerical vote would be after you see the final report, but I'm looking for what I'll call a straw vote next week, so that I can see what where people are and know what to focus on more. I obviously would like to focus more on the things where there's a strong number of people who are interested in it, as opposed to the ones that are not, because otherwise we could go on forever, right? I mean, this report could be 100 pages long. So that's my thought, but this is up to you as the committee. Mr. Milano.
I would like to pose a question, which is a question that worried me from the very beginning. How do we go about calling for a vote where many of the committee members who are here present have a vested financial interest in the outcome? So, for example, the status quo has served many employees very well, meaning the status quo of having the MOU negotiations behind closed doors. The status quo is not disclosing how much campaign contributions was given to a particular council member when they vote on the MOU. The status quo is not having public input, right? Unless somebody really knows when to come in during when they go into a private session. I think I'm the only one who's ever called in right before they go into closed session to make council aware of what they should be looking for. But we're not privy of that process. And so for those individuals who gain the benefits and the pay and the steps and everything else that goes into their pay, for them to vote and say, no, we don't want transparency, we vote against it. How do we solve that problem, right? Because we have to recognize, right, that a vested financial interest is a significant driver, right? If opening up MOU negotiations would lead to a restraint, right, on the largesse that the city would vest on employees, obviously keeping it hidden would be of significant advantage. So how would you address those issues where there is a vested interest, Mr. Holtzman?
Well, I can state my view, and Mr. Garcia may have his own. My view is you are a body that was created by the council. The council decided who should sit on this body, and the members of who are representatives of labor unions were included in that council vote. And so from at least I'll look at it from the non-legal perspective, and I'll ask Mr. Garcia to look at it from a legal perspective. I realize I'm a lawyer as well. From my non-legal perspective, you're servants of the council, as it were. You are representatives of the council who are selected by the council, and therefore the vote of this committee is the vote of the committee. I don't know, Mr. Garcia.
I really don't have anything else to add to that. That's exactly, the council wanted the perspective of the organizations to be on this panel in addition to the community members. So there's no weighing of votes here, Mr. Milano.
I'm sorry, I misspoke, because that was not my intent. My intent is, how do you formulate the presentation, right? If we are discussing the issue of dissenting opinions, right? And if my opinions happen to be in the minority, right, I would expect that those opinions would be present in the report, primarily because the vote would very likely be against my suggestions. And so I'm not claiming that they should not vote. My comment has to do with the format and the manner in which the report is prepared.
Well, but respectfully, Mr. Milano, you even though you're not saying the votes should not count, you're attempting to frame it in such a way, if I could say, that would lessen the impact of that vote and the communication from each member. And also, I would note, you're being a little presumptuous that how the other communities who are not part of the association are going to comment on this report and how they're going to vote, and a little presumptuous of how the members of the association is going to vote. So I just don't, we'll get there when we get there, I guess. But I think any attempt by the report to differentiate between the impact or the import of a particular vote or recommendation, I don't think it's going to be wise.
Well, if I may, I just want to add.
Mr. Manning has been trying to speak for, again, he's been the most patient guy of the evening. Can we please let him speak?
I have a rebuttal that is very quick.
Okay, make it very quick because Mr. Manning has been waiting for a very long time.
The rebuttal to Mr. Garcia is that creating everyone will have an opportunity to a dissenting opinion. And if you do that, then there's no voices that are being, should we say, clouded in the opinion of the majority.
It is my intention to include any dissenting opinions that anybody wants. They will be included at the back of the report. I do want the opportunity. I don't want anybody to feel they haven't had the opportunity to be heard. By the recipients of the report. Mr. Manning.
Hi, this is just a procedural question. I missed a good part of the meeting, so this is something that might have been discussed already. I know that we've got a meeting next week, and then the original plan was to wrap up the first Monday in May, but then there was some discussion earlier in the meeting that maybe we'll need an additional meeting. So do we have kind of a schedule of what our meetings are going to look like in terms of when they will be?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, we do. John, where's John? There he is.
Right here.
Can you just? I know the next meeting is next week, but the following meeting, I can't remember what the date is.
May 5th.
So the May 5th meeting will not be the final meeting?
That is the final meeting.
That is the final meeting. So there'll be one meeting. What I'm planning on doing, and God willing, I will accomplish this, is to get the draft so that we're going to have one more meeting before we have a draft. And then there's only going to be one meeting once we have the draft, and maybe a very long meeting, who knows? But I will get the draft out. I do promise you this ahead of time, so that people can read it. But that is the plan. Obviously, if we hit a hitch and we really haven't had the conversation we need to have, we'll figure out something. But that's the plan. We have a date, I should say. Also, we're up against a date for the council, right, John?
We were, and give me one quick second. It would be right around sometime in the end of May. Jason, do you remember what that date was off the top of your head?
Yeah, John, I believe it's May 24th.
So, I'm sorry, Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Did you say May 5th? That doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, it'd be May. It'd be. I believe May 2nd is the correct date. Yep.
Thank you.
My apologies. I was going off memory and I couldn't find the email I sent you, Ms. Wolfson. But yes, that's right. May 2nd.
So that is the plan. Obviously, if we have massive, et cetera, we'll figure out some other way. But that is the plan.
Okay, thank you. And I do plan to go back and watch this meeting all the way through. So, just to make sure that I didn't miss anything important.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. And as a parting gift to you, I'm going to buy you a new Wi-Fi router. He's frozen. All right. So do we have anything else for the good of the order here this evening?
Move to adjourn.
Seconds from somebody?
Second.
And we're adjourned at 8:53 p.m. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.